Hey, it's Drew, and we do our best to take you on the road. This time, we are taking you all the way to Paris. What that means is you're going to actually be in a cafe at Charles de Gaulle Airport where I caught up with the former CMO of Lenovo and Motorola. We had an amazing conversation. I hope you don't get too distracted by the clinking glasses. Just think of it as a little French Parisian ambiance. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, featuring the sharpest minds in marketing, inspirational case histories, and weekly insights you can apply to your business. Find out why top CMOs rank this podcast among their favorites. Now, here's your host, Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
Hey, it's Drew, and we try to bring you first here at Renegade Thinkers Unite, and this is the first interview that I've done in an airport, but not just any airport. We're in the Paris airport, and we're here with my new friend, John. How do you pronounce your last name?
Huckfeldt.
Huckfeldt.
And it's Jan, actually.
It's Jan Huckfeldt. Oh, say it. So there we go. First, not the first time I butchered a name. Jan Huckfeldt. And Jan is the former CMO of Motorola and Lenovo, and also the Paris chapter president of the CMO Club. So a shout out to our good friend Pete Kranick. So we're going to talk about marketing in an airport like Parisians. And I don't really know how that'll go, but we'll see, and we will practice our French accent, and it will be just fine. So first of all, welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite.
Well, thank you, Drew. Delighted to have you here, and we are sitting actually in the Eiffel Cafe, which is a brand new, obviously inspired by the Tour Eiffel, by the Eiffel Tower.
It's actually hilarious. We landed this morning and are here for a little adventure, but we met because Jan is on his way somewhere. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life right now.
Well, I'm actually going to go to Dublin to visit my two elderly kids. Elderly kids, they're 15 and 17. So looking forward to that for the weekend.
Now, you went to school in Dublin. I think I saw, or you went to, you got a PhD.
Yeah, so unusual for a marketeer. I have a PhD in chemistry, and it was awarded by the University College Dublin, in fact. Yeah.
And so, from there, you went right to P&G to be a product developer?
Well, I was in research and development, and my specific task was to actually move a formula card ready lab experiment into mass production. And so it was mainly process engineering. And the first renegade moment actually in my career was that I said, look, I can see where I'm going on this technical career, but that's not what I ultimately want to do. I want to become a general manager, and in marketing you have to go through in Procter & Gamble you have to go through marketing to become a general manager. And so I actually asked the director of R&D at that time, a small American woman, whether I could not move into marketing, and she said, Jan, we have great plans for you, but you're the furthest away within the organization from marketing, and I cannot see this happening. And so I didn't listen and interviewed with this number of people in marketing, and it was a German marketing director, Stefan Hohmeister, and I thank him still today for taking me on, and that was that's where my journey in marketing started.
And there are a couple of things that you said that are so interesting to me. First of all, there are very few companies that say you can't get to general management without going through marketing. And that's the first time I've actually ever heard that. I imagine it might be true at Colgate or Unilever, but that's so interesting. It says a lot about where P&G's mind is.
Well, I think it has changed, unfortunately, in P&G. So I think now that is no longer the case, but at that time it certainly was. I mean, the path was typically marketing.
And so what brands did you end up working on?
Well, I was working first in baby care, and from an R&D standpoint, I launched the Can Do wipes for little toddlers, which which was a fun project, and then I worked on big paper brands like Bounty and Charmin, so highly commoditized non-involvement categories, which was very good learning. It's tough. I mean, if you can market those kind of products, you know how to do marketing. And then I moved, was one of the first to move onto the Gillette business, and that is where, when I was then actually approached by HP because their blades and razor model, their printing business is following the blades and razor model, and I ultimately joined them. And that was it was an interesting move from one American company to another, but in a very different world. HP did not a lot of systems in place, and P&G, you needed a data point, you had it at your fingertips, and in HP it felt a bit more like in the Wild West at that time.
And that was, so was it HP B2C or HP B2B or a little both?
It was both. Yeah. First it was consumer, and then I was promoted to VP, and I was responsible for all verticals. And one of the renegade campaigns actually at the time which we created was the printing money campaign, and it was a provocative campaign of showing how good quality these ink printers actually are, being able to print bills.
Yes.
And the bills were at the same time communicating that it was actually cheaper than laser printers, and therefore communicating the value of all. So it was more quality and value at the same time, and it was a renegade in a sense that many of my colleagues were scared, obviously, about this notion of having a campaign talking about printing money, which from an external relation point of view could have created issues.
I want to. Exactly. I mean, the first thing you think about, well, you're encouraging people to do something that is illegal. So what was the sort of point of view? And because that's one of those moments where somebody had to sell something and have a little courage. How did you get the courage to sell this to management?
Well, I strongly believe that when you do marketing, you need to stand out, right? And for that you need to take risk, and obviously it needs to be informed risk, not crazy risk, and it needs to follow a certain purpose. And in fact, when I brief agencies, and you could ask them, they will confirm it. I always tell them, look, I want that you come back with things which scare me, and if their ideas or their creative is not scaring me, then it's simply not daring enough. And I think it's important. I mean, I give you another example of a campaign which we developed during my Motorola time at Lenovo. We actually relaunched the brand, and we can talk a little bit more about it because it was a very interesting and very insightful period. But we were looking at relaunching the brand as a challenger brand, and we took on Apple and Samsung, and we did it in the right tonality. So not. I think it's important to have the right tonality in this.
Yes. So I'm going to pause for a second here because we're in Paris, and you mentioned printing money. And of course, that allows me to talk about Ben Franklin, which it's not really a great show if I don't, because Franklin is my hero, and I'm reading yet another biography on him. And I learned something, and when I learn something about Franklin, it's surprising because I've read so much about him. Because he was America's first chief marketing officer. That's why he's important to this story overall. But interestingly, a very important first contract that he got as a young printer was printing money for for Philadelphia and the what is the Dominion of Pennsylvania. You would know this, but anyway. So we're talking about printing money. Yes, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, right? So that was an important thing for him. Now I'm digressing, but I want to go back to the money campaign. How did it end up getting executed, and how did it work?
Frankly, I can't remember, Drew. It's so long ago. I was just thinking of, what were the different renegade moments.
Right.
That was certainly one.
Okay.
I know that we executed it.
Okay.
And I believe it did well enough. But I wouldn't have any further detail.
All right, perfect place to take a break. When we come back, we'll dive into the Motorola campaign. So stick with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only, at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
All right, we're back. We're still in our little Eiffel Cafe here in Charles de Gaulle Airport. And you started talking about Motorola before I interrupted you to talk about Ben Franklin. So let's go back to the Motorola thing. And what was sort of one of the key insights that you pulled out of that experience in terms of sort of really lessons learned?
Yeah, there are a number of lessons. One, I think it is important to have the guts to be strategic, right? I mean, to make a choice, a tough choice is not easy. And I think it's critical that one does the homework in terms of analyzing the landscape and the data, and then indeed driving towards strategic choice. And that was the moment in spring 2016, because just recall, Google had acquired the mobility part of Motorola. There's mobility and solutions, and they acquired the mobility part. 2.5 years later, they sold it to Lenovo for actually a fraction of the original acquisition. And for Lenovo, this was a very smart investment at that time, because Lenovo wanted to get into the hardware business end to end, and Lenovo was at that time already number one in PCs. They wanted to go into a broader breadth of hardware, therefore they needed to also invest into mobile phones or mobile devices. And inevitably, as the world went mobile, there was more and more cloud needed, and more cloud means that companies need more servers. So they actually acquired two companies at the same time, the server business from IBM and the mobility part from Motorola from Google. And that was smart from a mobile business group standpoint, because Lenovo lacked IP rights to actually enter the Western markets, and they were covering with the Lenovo brand 50% of the world. Now in 2016, moving forward, what we found when I was joining the mobile business group, Lenovo had just decided to actually discontinue, to terminate the actual Motorola name and fold it under Lenovo. It was Lenovo Moto, there was another brand which was Lenovo Vibe, and there was Zook, and there were a few other sub-brands if you want. And we analyzed the market and said, look, if we want to have any shot at this highly competitive market, we have to be putting all our eggs into one basket. We have to be investing behind one brand, one team, and a greatly reduced lineup. And that is exactly what we did. And a year after Lenovo had announced to discontinue Motorola, we actually relaunched Motorola. at the Mobile World Congress in 2017. And the first big campaign was this Challenger campaign I mentioned earlier, where we invited people to skip the seventh generation of the Apple and Samsung phones, because we said, look, they are only doing incremental innovation, which was very much true at that stage. There was, the screen got a little bit bigger and the camera a few megapixels more, and these were incremental innovation, while this Moto Z, which we offered, was a very smart idea of actually enhancing and breaking the limitations of a smartphone by adding a module to it in a simple snap on the back of it. And so if you were into photography, you could add a true zoom, 10 times optical zoom to it to actually take, shots of your son playing football, which is notoriously difficult with a smartphone. If you are in music, you put a little speaker on it, which is also a wonderful spider phone for business purposes, etc. Anyway, this was a great campaign, and it was a if you want, a gutsy move taking on the big guys, and it was accompanied by a very good PR stunt, and it earned us a lot of awards actually at that time. And then the big question for us was, so how do we move from there to the next stage of the Challenger campaign? And with the Ogilvy team in New York, we worked on identifying true insights and true tensions when it comes to the actual category. So rather than just taking on competition, we said let's look into the category overall and what was blatantly obvious, and where we then did research together with Harvard professor Nancy Edcoff. She's working in the medical department as a psychologist, a wonderful person, and we found that indeed the use of smartphones was becoming a misuse and impacted relationships. I mean, it impacted many things, right? The security on the roads, it impacted the productivity of people because they check their phone every 7 minutes. And it is terrible in terms of sleep patterns and all of that. But we particularly looked into relationships and found that it actually helps people to build better relationships with people far, but it has a negative impact on the relationships of people living close, right? And so what we wanted to do, and what we did with our phone life balance campaign, was actually raising the awareness, and as a first smartphone brand, and advocating for a better phone life balance. And we launched that campaign first in India. That was in fall 2017, during Diwali, where we actually showed videos of people being completely absorbed during this family festival and very important holiday period. We showed people being just completely absorbed in their phone and not participating in the actual family event, and it struck a chord with people. And then we did a number of further works and creative executions which brought this to life, and ultimately it won us Cannes Lion, which was nice.
And I, as you're talking about it, I remember reading about it and writing about it. It's funny, now there's a term for it. It's called phubbing.
Right.
When you ignore someone because you're looking at your phone. There are a couple of things that you said that we've recorded, I think, 140, maybe 150 episodes of the show, and no one has actually said strategic choice. And I really think that's so important, and I want to pause and just think about that for a second, because strategy is choice. And a lot of brands and people that I talk to don't think of it that way. It's like, we want to sell as many products as we can to as many people as we can in as many channels, and strategy is not being all things to all people. Even Byron Sharp would agree with that, even though he's Mr. Awareness and so forth. It's making choices and deciding, what are you going to say about the brand? What aren't you going to say about the brand? Who are you going to talk to? Who aren't you going to talk to? And I think that's really important. The other thing that you said that it really struck me when you said you reduce the product line. And I'm remembering a very important when Steve Jobs comes back to Apple and he finds this product line. There's lots of, and there's a famous story that Isaacson talks about in this book where he pulls up a board, a raw thing, and he basically says, does a little grid, we're going to have 4 products. And these are the 4 products and these are the 4 targets, boom. And got rid of 30 or 40 of them, and that was the beginning of this, of Apple coming back. So strategic choice, and that's what that was, saying 4 products, 4 targets, here we go. And again, it's easier choice is to just sort of add another one. But the last thing I said, and this will go back to the P&G days, is I feel like the way these brands have grown is just keep adding line extensions, and they keep adding iterations to them. And I just wonder, maybe that's increased shelf space, but has it? Not necessarily, not to diss on P&G, but I feel like you're not necessarily getting to innovation when you do that. You're not making important choices. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more, Drew. So, for me, the definition of a marketeer is a growth strategist. It is a person who is delivering the choices, the strategic choices to drive growth within a company, and that these choices go across the 4 Ps, the 4 Cs, right? I mean, which product, what pricing, how do we promote the product, and so on. And I think if more of us marketeers would actually define themselves that way, they would also have, I think, an easier life. And I define kind of 3 imperatives which are related to that. So you, as a marketeer, you're the voice of the customer. I think it is absolutely critical that you think and act like a CFO instead of trying to talk marketing language to your peers. Talk business. Talk like a CFO colleague. I think it will help you a lot. And the third aspect is really about leadership and influence. And I think that is the area where I'm learning still a lot, and where I have learned a lot, but I can certainly improve personally a lot more, and that is how to influence your peers and how to be smarter in getting what you want to get without having formal authority. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge of the CMO, because you're exposed to all these functions, and typically your peers believe that they know marketing just as well or better than you do. So it's, I think the influencing part is absolutely critical.
So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into that aspect of CMO success. Stay with us.
Did you know that Renegade Thinkers Unite was ranked number 2 of the top 10 podcasts for CMOs by Crackerjack Marketing? Wow, we're really honored. Now, we couldn't do that without amazing guests, and we've had some amazing CMOs on this show, and also terrific listeners like you all. If you like what we do here, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Also, as a special thanks, I'd like to send you a free ebook on Renegade Thinkers. Now, for that, just email drew@renegade.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Since we're in Paris, and we're thinking big, we're in one of the great capitals of Europe and the world, I thought it'd be a good time to talk about you've been talking about leadership. Let's break those things down. You mentioned 3 key things. Voice of the customer, obviously, that's one that I think most CMOs kind of understand why they need to have that. Being a CFO and understanding that, and then leadership. But let's start with voice of the customer. What's state of the art today as a CMO? I think we were talking about your experience with a P&G product manager who went to China to watch someone wash. But what does particularly a B2B marketer do today to really understand their customers?
Well, I would like to refer to a wonderful article in the Harvard Business Review, which is the jobs to be done. I think what we easily fall into is that we just think in a very singular way about the usage of our product. Many companies might not even think of that and just push their product. Next level would be then to say, okay, so how does my customer or consumer actually use the product? But I think where the real work lies is to understand what is actually the emotional state from the beginning to the end of the journey a customer or consumer is taking in using our service or product, right? And I think that's where also the big insights can be found, and where you as a company can really make a difference.
So I'm going to refer you back to the most recent episode we did with Brent Adamson. We talked a lot about jobs to be done and buyer enablement and doing it. What's interesting about it is it's a lot harder than it sounds, because you now have a buying committee on average of maybe 10 people. If you're selling software, right, and you've got to start with a $100,000 contract that's going to become a $1 million contract, there are 10 people that could weigh in on that, from the security guy to the IT guy to the HR person to the CFO, maybe even the CEO wants to weigh in. There's a buying committee now that has, in finance, that has to approve a purchase after the fact. Legal might want to weigh in, and maybe even procurement. So, and I've still only named 7, so I don't know who all the 10 are, but organizations are big. And so buying is broken. One of the questions that we get asked a lot is, okay, so the jobs to be done, a CFO wants to know how it's going to pay out. But how do we sort of learn about that CFO? How do we find those insights about that CFO at a particular company and then try to generalize them?
So, well, I think when it comes to the return on investment of marketing, I think that's still the biggest challenge overall, right? I mean, what in any company a CFO will be demanding, or a CEO will be demanding of us marketeers, is to demonstrate that it actually has a return on investment, even short term. I think that entire piece is probably still the biggest challenge. To find and develop a scorecard which is a good mix between the typical high-level business metrics and marketing metrics, and show a correlation between these. Despite the fact that obviously in the digital area you have a lot more data at hand, it still is very challenging to make that connection. On some businesses it's easier than on others, but it remains, I think, a big challenge where we still need to work on.
And one of the things that's interesting to me is that in observing this in B2B in particular is that because there's such an emphasis on ROI, what that does is that the B2B marketer says, all right, I'm going to focus all my energy on demand generation. I'm not going to think about brand at all. I'm just going to try to get as many leads as I can.
It's a terrible fallacy, of course.
Right, and the fact that you could actually do demand gen and without brand is and tell me why you say that it's a terrible fallacy.
Well, because if you don't build your brand, it's a little bit like your pension, right? I mean, you don't stop your pension to, I don't know, have a great life, and then you wake up when you're 60 and realize, oh, but I haven't paid in my pension. You need to pay every month, and that's also a little bit how you ultimately build a brand. I mean, it's as Byron Sharp is saying, it's about creating these connections and creating mental availability, and that takes time, and it takes it takes again a strategic mind to identify what exactly are those specific hooks or connections you want to be planting and building out in people's brains. And that's not done. That's not done via short-term lead generation.
No, it's not, and it's funny. As you were talking, I talk about it as sort of deposits in a goodwill bank that you're going to need to draw upon. But sort of, and Sharp would say, look, without awareness, you're as a B2B marketer, you're going to struggle because your salespeople are going to have 10 times the hard work to get in the door. Who are you? I don't know who you are. Get out of my office, right? I don't want to talk to you. I'm going to talk to someone that I've heard of, that I trust. And you can't. It's very difficult. And just say, well, here's a product. It's terrific. You should buy it. It just doesn't work. Yet that still is the prevailing wisdom. All right. As we look to wrap up, because John has to get on a plane at some point soon, or at least get looks like the line has gone down a little bit. What would you say, as you're looking ahead, where do you think some of the things that you could help instruct some of the younger aspiring CMOs as we go through it? We talked about voice of the customer, being a CFO. What about leadership? Let's talk a little bit about that, your insights on how these folks can sort of develop their leadership skills and what that really looks like.
Yeah, that's well. Thank you for that question. I'm actually passionately working on a book which I call the CMO Handbook. That might be at least the draft title for now. And it really is a collection of tools across brand strategy, go-to-market strategy, advertising, and advertising agency management. But it's also about leadership. And when it comes to leadership, I think of a number of different leadership behaviors. One, which I think is absolutely core, is that you as a leader have a purpose, right? Whether it is, you think of Simon Sinek, that is also important for brands, but it is equally important for leaders. You inspire and engage people in a much more powerful way when you actually are chasing to fulfill a specific purpose, right? And anybody who hasn't read Viktor Frankl's book, it's a beautiful book about his very tough time at Auschwitz, and he's one of the few survivors, and he's describing about how his logotherapy is ultimately based on finding meaning in life, right? So anyway, that's all about the point of purpose. I think is very important. Another one is, as a leader, you need to protect. You need to give a sense of protection for your people. My last boss, Emma de Langcin, was certainly excellent in this. I felt very protected and therefore could take risks, which I would otherwise not have done. If you feel not protected, you will just do what? You will back up. You will cover your backside. You don't dare, and therefore you cannot achieve what you need to be achieving in business, and that is really going to the edge. Strategic, you talked about it. It's extremely important to make tough choices. A strategy is a set of integrated choices to achieve an objective, and the choice is really what you do and not do. And the clearer you can spell out what you not do, the sharper and better your strategy is. And that's tough. It inevitably means that people are not going to be happy because you say no to, I don't know, their proposals, to whatever that might be. Simplicity is extremely important. It's important to trust and reward your people. There's probably nothing more empowering than your boss saying, I entrust you with it, because it's if you want the opposite of micromanagement, if your boss gives you an objective and says, look, I trust you with it, just Just tell me along the way how I can help you in busting barriers. That is certainly a much more empowering leadership behavior than following up on every individual action as along the way. And finally, it really is influence, what I mentioned earlier. And influence has a lot of different aspects. I mean, ultimately, it's all about emotional intelligence, and that is certainly an area where I have learned the most over the last couple of years.
That's a great, it's funny, we both know Thomas Barta, who has done a lot of research on leadership, and what I realized in all the interviews, most of the focus of my work has been on marketing and the practice of marketing and very little on leadership. So I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that. It's a great list. One thing that when I talk to CMOs who are in between opportunities, we always talk about it's not about the company, it's about the CEO. If you don't pick your CEO well, you're not going to succeed because there's so much pressure on the CMO to perform quickly. You need that protection. I love that word. You need the protection to be able, you need some time to do the homework that you need to do to build a solid foundation. You need time to build the influence across the suite of other people who are ready to say, yeah, no, I know marketing better than you because I watch ads on television. So you need that CEO to say, wait, and then one of the things that one CMO said to me, which I think is so interesting, actually a couple of them, was even if you have the idea, if you go in and say, here's the idea, you lose. It has to be a sort of a team effort. You have to sort of get it out of the group. So anyway, you made me think I've got to do more episodes on leadership. Jan, thank you so much for your insights and being on the show. Anything you'd like to, last words before you hop into the security queue?
Well, just thank you, Drew, for making this happen so unexpected and doing it at the airport. Why not?
Yeah, why not exactly? And we'll be looking for your book. And I know personally the struggles that's a challenge getting a book out. So very good luck with that. And again, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you again.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.